Hi everyone, it's Jerry. Round 4 from Norway Chess 2015 had a familiar pairing. Viswanathan against Magnus Carlsen. Let's have a look. Anand opening with e4, Carlsen replying e5. We have the Ruy Lopez. We do not visit the Berlin defense. We don't enter an open game, that popular queenless middle game position, but rather a closed system with d3 and d6. This move d6, by the way, just throwing a quick pop quiz at you. I do this from time to time in these types of videos. What is that move doing? What is the d6 move doing? If you'd like to, go ahead, pause the video, see what reasons you can assign for the d6 move. Okay, what's it doing? It's opening a door for the bishop. If you said that or thought that, perfect, you're right. It's working this knight into a pin as well. That's true. But what's most important to recognize is that there is, the e5 pawn is defended. And there's a little bit of a changing of the guard going on right now. Now that the d6 pawn is there to defend e5, the c6 knight is no longer needed to defend the e5 pawn, and he has the potential to maybe hunt the light square bishop down. There is now a threat of b5, bishop b3, and knight a5. There goes the light square bishop, and we would have a much different ball game on hand. A imbalanced knight for bishop exchange, black with the bishop pair, etc. Why am I drawing your attention to this? Well, it helps us to understand white's next move, helps us to understand the timing of certain moves in the game. Move 7, c3. This interferes with the idea of b5 and then tracking the bishop down. This is also preparing a central expansion with d4. And this, by the way, is not just some random point I'm trying to make about the timing of certain moves. I'm bringing this to your attention because in this game, or really in this particular opening, the closed system of the Ruy Lopez, it appears that players go about play in a way where it's independent of what their opponent is doing, like kind of like it doesn't really matter what moves you're going to do. I'm going to do my moves, you do your moves, and we'll fight later on. Not the case. There are these finer details, the timing of certain moves, that play a great role in the game, and I'll draw attention to just a couple other ones in this game. Okay, so carrying on, we have now castles, knight b to d2, this knight, the typical journey to g3. Similarly, black does a little reposition of their dark square bishop, so let's get some more moves in here. b5, bishop to c2. That seems a little bit odd, right? Isn't this a better diagonal, more aggressive looking, that's for sure? Opposite the king, pinning a pawn, why not? Well, this is why. Knight a5. Is this knight really inconvenienced? No. He's on the edge, typically not good, but in this case it is a useful move to get in because black would really like to be able to move their c-pawn and help out. That c-pawn will help out controlling the center of the board. So in order to avoid that knight move with tempo, the bishop tucks himself in on c2, staying out of striking distance of the knight. Bishop f8, knight f1, g6, and h3. Many things we can say about h3. Controls g4, prevents a pin against the knight, flight square for the king, pivot square for a knight. Either knight, maybe. Only after h3 do we now have bishop to b7. Before this move 12, by the way, notice something. Queen bishops. Neither queen bishop has moved. Why not? I'm not sure I have an answer to that. What I can say is that they have a tendency to just not know their place very early on. They have many options. Okay, maybe e3, g5 for the white dark square bishop, the white queen bishop. This bishop here, maybe he fianchettos, maybe he sticks around to watch over f5 from a knight, although there is a pawn there. But I think the main thing here is, they just don't know their place. They have some options, so both sides are keeping their options open. They're maintaining some flexibility in the position. Only after h3, only after this is no longer a possibility to pin the knight and indirectly influence the center of the board, only after h3 does the bishop commit himself to the b7 square. Only after white has exhausted this move, this tempo. Following up, knight g3, knight to b8, and now d4. So black really wants to get the c-pawn involved. So going back home with the knight and then repositioning here, connecting the knights. Now we have this break in the center, d4, another instance of time right here. Why not d4 at this moment before, let's say, bringing the knight to g3? This allows capture, and now, yet again, this queen-knight move with a tempo against the bishop. And in fact, in this particular case, e4 is coming under a tremendous amount of pressure, and the light square bishop will in fact be lost. So, only after this knight on c6 runs in reverse do we now have white pushing in the center. d4 it is. e4 is secure enough. Bishop, knight, rook, offset by these three. Knight b to d7, striking on the queen side. A nice move to get in here. Rook pawns attacking a knight pawn. White is in a position to open up the position on his terms. Maybe it'll open up, maybe it won't. It's nice to have your opponent guessing. c5, d5, and c4. So a lot just happened just there. Position has closed in the center, and c4 grants this knight a really nice square on c5. This is super important. Another drawing your attention yet again to time in this one. c4 right now is important. If you just follow through with bishop g7, hang on, we have the move b3. And if you do this one move later, well, here's now the move b4, and forget about going into c5. c4 needs to happen right away, making certain the knight can make use of c5. This is where black is strong on the queen side of the board, where there is some space advantage. This is where black has a pawn in white's territory, on white's side of the board, and a knight on c5 will be very well connected with the knight on c4. There's some nice coordination going on both b3 and d3. Okay, following up, bishop g5, bishop b7 only now, queen d2. White has now finished development. There's a little bit of a battery going on here. Possibilities for a dark square bishop exchange. Rook to b8. Knight h2, repositioning and looking to add some more fuel to the piece that is pinned on f6. Bishop to c8, and this is where there's some slight shift evaluation-wise. The move bishop to c8, repositioning, getting out of the rook's way, looking to maybe advance with b4 or capture. Maybe even watching over some of these light squares over here as well. White still hops in to this square and now jumps into h6, and this starts to become a bit disruptive to black, and something has to be given up. In fact, we have now a bishop for knight exchange, not something you really want to have happen, giving up a master defender of your kingside, your fianchettoed bishop, and to give it up for a knight, you have to be now very delicate as black to cover your dark squares. Instead of bishop to c8, getting out of the pin with queen c7 or queen to b6, so as to meet knight g4 with the capture, is another variation to be looking into. It's a big deal because we do have some shift, and this is where we have the first main imbalance struck in the position. There has yet to be a capture on board, close to 20 moves in play here. We're going to have a knight for bishop exchange on board, and it's certainly something to look back on and question, should I really have done that or not? Excuse me. Let's see how things play out from here. We had in the game bishop c8, knight g4, knight c5, knight h6, and the bishop for knight exchange. Something other than capturing the knight. Going here, well, you could just resign. The only other option is to move the king, but surprisingly enough, there's a rover available. The rover is the rook up and over idea of rook e3 to f3. It seems very awkward, super atypical in a closed position like this, but in even a closed position where there hasn't even been an exchange yet. Rook e3 to f3, looking to add some more pressure to the pinned knight, and even indirectly pressure against f7. This would be very uncomfortable. One of the computer lines is rook e7, rook f3, rook here, or excuse me, before that to play, rook e to b7, a takes b5, rook takes b5, and then to actually ignore the threat against b2 and do something like this. Knight f1, e3, and look to pile up yet again on this knight. Anyhow, Carlsen felt that this knight was simply intolerable, got rid of it. Bishop takes bishop. Pawn takes, b2 is now hit. It's defended with rook to a2. Position is roughly equal. This is not considered best. Rook to a2, defending b2. One of the moves being called out for is bishop to e3, looking to eliminate black's best piece. And there is also the threat of obtaining a connected passed pawn, let's say on rook takes b, bishop takes knight, pawn takes. This is a super strong d5 pawn. Black is up material, but structurally, how good can these two sets of double isolated pawns really be? One is dropping right away, and maybe not long off, that knight will be sinking into that c4 square. This would not be a welcome position for black. Instead of rook takes there, this move can follow, but now we have bishop to a4, and it is white who is still standing better and playing for something here. We did not have this. We did not have bishop to e3. Instead, the more natural-looking move, rook to a2, meeting the threat against b2. And now a3. This pawn really couldn't be defended. I questioned this when I was reviewing for the game. Why not, let's say, bishop here? That's this is a square that you really want to keep open for a knight to reposition to the d7 square. On bishop to d7, really wanting to be greedy and hang on to all this, well, not all this material, but hanging on to the material, essentially, is bishop to d7. If that is on board, we yet again have this idea of rook e3 and the rook coming over here. There are a lot of pieces approaching the kingside here, who is, again, without their master defender, their fianchettoed bishop, their dark square bishop. There are dark square weaknesses. Black is without their dark square bishop. White has a dark square bishop. Black has to be very careful. This knight on g3, by the way, it appears that he is boxed out. If there aren't any tactics in the position, this knight, one may very well assume is just out of play, right? He's negated by the pawn, but there are instances where the knight could even jump into h5 or f5, and if the pawn is no longer around, let's say a quick queen g5 and queen g7 mate, things like that are in the air, and black needs to take good care of that, or good care of these, be aware, I should say, be aware of these possibilities that are present. Okay. On rook a2, we had the follow-up a3, b takes a3, so black was quick to, well, he was up a pawn, and now he's giving it right back. What has a3 accomplished? Well, for one, this rook is now on a closed file, this one is now on an open file, and the white queenside structure is split. Following up, knight d7, and now f4, very thematic. White playing with the bishop pair. Let's look to open up the position. To be a bit more specific, if you have this X-factor bishop, the dark square bishop, the unopposed bishop, striking at your opponent, striking at your opponent's pawns who are on dark squares that try to restrict in some way or another the dark square bishop, trying to eliminate them is a good idea. f4 does just that. Striking at e5 looks to peel open the f-file. The follow-up a5 gives this square to the light square bishop. This ties in well with a knight jump into d3, and the bishop one day making use of the a6 square, maybe to maintain a pawn even on d3 after an exchange. One other thing to point out is on f4, there are also, after this move, there's a couple pieces unprotected. Right now, bishop's protected, knight's protected. As soon as f4 is played, these now are both unprotected. The queen is cut off from defending the bishop. The knight is now just no longer defended by the pawn. What would you do on queen a4? Excuse me, queen h4. Both pieces are hit. What would be the reply? White had this worked out, of course. Bishop g5. Queen takes knight. Only way to save the queen. But then rook e3, and the queen is trapped. Black has to give it up. Black has to give up their queen for a rook and a minor piece. So the best from here, one of the moves right now being called out for is knight to b3, but another one is e takes f4, rook takes queen, pawn takes, and then queen e1, eliminating the most annoying pawn, and white is the better side. There isn't going to be compensation for black in this position. There is some coordination here between the knights, but this will not be enough, especially with the weaknesses present on the black king side, the dark squares in particular. So, queen h4 we're not seeing, instead a5, rook f1, preparing an advance or a capture. The rook is certainly better placed on f1. Defensive e4 is no longer needed. f6, f5, another shift structurally, breaking at the center, breaking at the black king side. Knight d3, bishop takes, pawn takes, and a really cool move here, not the recapture on d3, but rather queen d1. The queen has some more exciting things to do, which is to say jump into g4 and exert some more pressure against the kingside structure, the g6 pawn in particular. If queen takes pawn instead, this allows black to now get some useful moves in here. For one, queen b6 with check, and let's say on a counterattacking move, bishop e3, black can in fact ignore that and think about moves like bishop to a6. You take the queen, here comes the bishop, pressure on the rook, the pawn, the bishop can be picked up next. This is sidestepped. White does not go in for this, doesn't allow that type of counterplay. Queen to d1, g4, and it's even making this rook a2 move. When black earlier played that a3 advance, giving the pawn back, it kind of made this rook move look, the rook position, the queen rook's position, look really ridiculous. But Now white is finding a way to really have some nice harmony with their pieces. The rook gets to slide right over and form this nice battery on the f-file. Soon to happen. Black follows up with rook e7, getting all the pieces working. Both rooks, knight, bishop, queen, and pawn all attacking the black king. Rook f7. These pieces, by the way, are not contributing here. White is in a perfect position, very nice harmony here. White only at this point scoops up the pawn, knight c5, queen f3, bishop a6, and white is already at the point where they can ignore certain threats by black to win material. Case in point right here, white is simply not reacting to the threat against the rook and instead moving forward, improving the queen position, going after the black king's throat. g5, white will not be denied. h4, barreling ahead, breaking down the black kingside. Bishop takes rook. White is recapturing. White's down the exchange, but white has the initiative. White has the attack. White has a deadly bishop that is anchored right very deep in the black position on h6. Queen d7, chop, chop, queen h5, gets out of this diagonal so that the pawn can push and the knight can have that much more say in the position. A knight on f5, one of the most deadly squares for a knight, a white knight against a black kingside castled position. Just an enormous, enormous piece. King h8, f6, g7, there's now some coordination here. Possibilities for a rook or knight. Rook g8, black is trying to defend, but it's just not going to work out. The exchange has to be given back. The knight jumps right in with tempo. It's this knight is usually a pretty good piece here, but he's kind of just away from the action, and it's soon going to be the case that black, in fact, has to give up some material. The move played, queen g6, the queens come off, knight e7, another move with tempo. We've been seeing this the last several moves. White is playing their moves, and black is having to react. It's not a happy position to be in. White throwing the punches, and sometimes you're able to duck and not get hit, but other times you're getting hit, and black is getting hit pretty good right here. King g7, what else is there? The rook is hit. It's a sad move to have to play, but if you play here, that's one of those helpmates. Can't play to g7. What else are you going to do? Rook here would allow a check, and then rook to c8, which is now threatening a fork against the king and rook, and also looking to scoop up the d6 pawn, which is a key defender, the only defender of the knight. So if black, let's say, sidesteps the fork against the king and rook here with rook to f6, here comes a check, king g6, there goes a pawn, and a very significant one for sure. This pawn on d5 is now connected, passed. On rook takes knight, two connected passed pawns, black can throw in the towel. But as this one played out, we had instead king g7, knight takes rook, king takes knight. The rook is now getting active. a4, c4, h5, king f2, and it's at this point that black, in fact, throws in the towel. They just resigned right here after king to f2. May seem like a little bit of an awkward moment to go ahead and resign because, I could grab this pawn with check, but the king simply improves his position, and this pawn on d6 or even the pawn on a4 will be won in short order. As an example, on knight c5, you could play rook to d8. The pawn is hit. He could be defended, and unfortunately, black's in a position where the knight himself, he could be defended, or he can defend a pawn, but both of those things cannot happen at the same time. There isn't a secure square for the knight to be on where he can also defend the pawn at the same time. So knight to b7 here, there would follow rook to d7, pressure on the defending piece and the pawn. The knight has to move. And the other point here is that this move is played with check, as otherwise black would be landing a fork. But two connected pass pawns at this point, and that's clearly way too much. So again, at this point, after move 47, king to f2, it's at this point that Carlsen resigned. So that's all for this video. As always, I hope you got something out of it, and feel free as usual to leave any comments in the comment section below, and I'll catch you in the next one. That's all for now. Take care. Bye.